When I plein air paint, the first thing I do is take out my viewfinder. That's the black frame with the rule of thirds grid on it. And you also have a rule of thirds grid on your canvas, so you have that already laid out. This is useful because I can figure out the composition. I can focus on just one area, and I actually look through that while I'm drawing. I'll just hold it up and make sure I memorize where the intersecting points are going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and start to draw. I do this very loose and quickly, and I am using angular transfer to get like the angles of things. So if you're doing something that includes 1 point perspective, then I would use angular transfer. That's that technique where you hold your pencil up at that angle, you lock your arm, and then you transfer it over. So here's the scene I'm looking at. One of the things I do is also try and figure out where things start and end. My handout, that's my pencil that we're looking at here, and I'm looking at where that tree trunk starts, so where the roots are of that tree trunk in relationship to the building. So I'm just holding out a horizontal line, and from that I can determine that the tree trunk roots are actually sitting above where that building kind of ends, the bottom of the building. So I can do that to a couple of areas to see where things are striking, so it's like assembling a puzzle piece. So you can draw it out loosely. Doesn't really matter where you start to draw from as long as you get in the majority of the shapes. Now you don't have to draw everything. Things that are off in the distance, you're going to simplify so it doesn't have to be as perfect. So here's my drawing right before I go in and add paint to it. So I typically like to start off with the sky, and I use the sky color as my point of comparison. So I get that sky color and I base every other value off of what I lay down for the sky. You guys should all be working in the shade. You should never be painting in direct sunlight because that can skew your values. And I'm using a big brush, so I'm laying that in with a pretty big brush there, and I'm going in for any pockets of sky, so any like sky holes that are visible in between the branches of the trees, I'm going to go ahead and put those in too. Next, I'm going to go to the trim that's on the top of the building. So that trim is like a kind of a weird green color, almost turquoise. And that trim changes when it goes into the light. So for most of the time, that trim is in shadow from my point of view, but there's a moment where it flickers into light. So there's a light patch on it. So that's why there's a broken line there, because I'm going to go back in and put a lighter version of that green in that place. So you want to pay attention to things that are partially in shadow, partially illuminated. And you're going to see a lot of that. Like I'll see it on the sidewalk where there's a cast shadow from the trees on the sidewalk. So part of the shadow is in shade, the other part is fully illuminated. I like to work my paintings from the background into the middle ground. So next I'm going to go into the shadow areas within the tree. And remember, you're painting the tree in mass. You're not trying to replicate every single leaf. That would take a long time and it would probably overwhelm and distract your viewer. So I'm taking kind of a blue-green. The thing is, as you're painting, you may realize like that you've gone too dark or too light, or the hue is off on your paint. You've got to remind yourself that it's okay, that you can go back in and correct it later. If you're working with oil, you can wipe it out or you can layer on top. If you're working with acrylic, it's not that big of a deal. You can wait for it to dry and then put another layer on it. These paintings are going to be quick. They're only going to have 1 or 2 layers, depending on how rapidly you want to work. This is the scene that I'm looking at. One of the things I'm doing is deliberately unfocusing my eyes. So I'm looking at that tree and I'm seeing it for the shadow shapes, the blue-green shapes, and the yellow-green shapes. So I'm isolating it in terms of mass, not seeing it in terms of every single little leaf fleck. So I'm not going to do a Syrah here. So I've painted in a little bit of the grass. The grass is a gradient. So it's important to start to recognize when gradients are happening. So that grass, that lawn up front is darker and then it's progressively getting lighter as it goes back. And then I'm getting in the brown of the building. And you have to figure out which is a darker side, because there should be a darker side, a medium side, and a light side. It's kind of like the same as when you're doing a cube. Essentially, this building is a cube. It just has like another tiny cube on top of it, technically. You can get in some of the details, but I would say the majority of the details come at the very end. The tone kind of helped because it's very similar to the color of that building. It's kind of like a putty or a clay color. And I'm popping in some highlights. Those highlights are actually dapples of sunlight shining down on there. There's some green grass. So the thing is, I didn't actually have time to finish the whole thing. This is about as far as I got, just because I'm under a time constraint too. So I painted for about maybe 40 minutes, and that's from drawing to end. Hopefully you'll have time to cover the full surface. I'll go back and finish this painting up, but you can get an idea of how to start. You have to work quickly with a big brush, and you're covering stuff in a hurry, but still paying attention to value relationships, how one value connects up to another, assembling a puzzle, painting loose and swift. You're on the clock.